Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives. Not just the latest episode. All free at gcnlive.com. 7.
From the palatial studios at Emerson College in beautiful downtown Boston, this is the Jeff Santos Show on the Revolution Radio Network. Rebuilding America, together, investing, activism, and supporting the middle class. Now, here's Jeff.
Shane, and good afternoon, Americans, and welcome to the Jeff Santos Show. We are live in Studio A on the campus of Emerson College here in beautiful downtown Boston. Great to be with you today on the 18th of August, 2015. Got a great show for you. We're going to be talking about Bernie Sanders for the next couple hours. We're also going to be talking with our good friend Robert Craig. We'll get into Scott Walker, but we'll also get his thoughts about the Black Lives Matter and some articles that have appeared since the Seattle event that talk about, Madison being a very white, progressive place. And we'll talk to Robert Craig about that. And lastly, we'll Teacher Tuesday, of course. And we're going to focus on the issue, or let's just say the District of Columbia, with Miss Elizabeth Davis, the head of the Washington Teachers Union, Washington, D.C. Teachers Union. And we'll get a perspective about what is happening in D.C. You hear all the time, oh, well, they get so much money, and, what are they doing with it? Well, let me tell you, somebody who lived in D.C. for 9 years in the 90s and again in the mid-2000s, 2003, 4, 5, I can tell you that it's not like the money is flowing into the locations that are Washington, D.C. And it's not going to the students. It's not going to the teachers. And that's what's really needed. And we'll find out from our good friends at the AFT and the D.C. Teachers Union on that issue. 844-372-6867 is the phone number to join us. We're also going to be, of course, looking at our emails today, jeff@revolutionboston.com. Check us out on Facebook and Twitter at Jeff Santos Show.
Live in beautiful downtown Boston, this is the Jeff Santos Show.
34 minutes past the hour. It is indeed the Jeff Santos Show. 844-3-SANTOS, the phone number to join us. That's 844-372-6867. Our next guest joins us from the beautiful city of Seattle, Washington, where he is a freelance journalist. He's been on this show many times. It's a great resource for us in the Pacific Northwest. It's great to have our good friend Mark Taylor-Canfield back on the show with us. Mark, welcome back.
Hey, Jeff. Good to talk to you and all the folks on your network. And, good to talk to you again. It's been a while.
It has been a while. Obviously, being off last week, I was, in a situation where I was watching the television, and they were giving me the news, and to have a chance to talk to someone like you. Of course, I see this reported as this is a Bernie Sanders event, and these two women came up and destroyed the event, and, where was the security, and what's going on here, and, why did he let it happen, and this was Donald Trump, it wouldn't have happened. Well, all this stuff that came out to me is all false. First of all, it was a Social Security event, not his event, which plays a very big factor in this, Mark, because, what you have there is he's been invited to speak at an event. That is a lot different than what it is regarding, what people have been talking about. I think that, to me, is a very big part of this entire story. Talk to me about that. I know you were there covering both the Social Security event and the Sanders campaign.
Yes, it was a convergence of two different anniversaries on that day, actually, on August 8th, and that was the anniversary of the killing of Michael Brown in Ferguson. It was also the anniversary of the birth of the Social Security Administration. So, yes, the event was celebrating the birth of Social Security and, of course, trying to sustain it and protect it. There was a 5-tiered cake, and, they were handing out pieces of cake to the crowd to celebrate that birthday. So you're correct. Now, later in the evening, there was a Bernie Sanders campaign event at Heck Edmondson Pavilion, and news reports are that 15,000 people heard him there. The situation there was that the building was full to capacity at the University of Washington, so at least 3,000 people were still standing outside who never got a chance to get in. But that was, yes, an official Bernie Sanders campaign event, and I must report that the issue of the Black Lives Matter movement was addressed directly at that Edmondson Pavilion rally by the speakers who spoke in support of him before he came on stage, and also that was the first thing that he addressed when he came on stage. So, the Bernie Sanders campaign has made it very clear that they support the Black Lives Matter campaign. Another sort of subtle issue that may not have been reported as accurately as possible by a lot of mainstream press was that Marissa Johnson, who is one of the activists who has been interviewed about this disruption, is actually a member of another group, an independent group from the Black Lives Matter group, and that's called Outside Agitators 206. And they've been very active in Seattle, and she's been a very outspoken activist on issues of racism and the prison industrial complex here at many public events. So she's a well-known activist around town and has been associated with the Black Lives Matter campaign, but is actually a member of Outside Agitators 206, which is a completely independent group. So that's another subtlety that probably wasn't covered very well in the 30-second sound bites and, tweets about this subject.
Well, I just look at this whole issue, and, I think, again, Bernie Sanders' campaign could have maybe handled a lot of the back and forth better. But I think yesterday he was in Chicago, and he met with Jesse Jackson. Now, if there's anybody who understands insurgent campaigns, and sort of not getting help from Washington and the mainstream media, it's a guy like Jesse Jackson. So I thought that it was really interesting, and I'm hoping that that meeting produces a closer ties to the African-American community. I think he's headed to Charleston today, to South Carolina, or at least this week, to speak to a lot of those involved in the awful massacre there a couple of months ago. So I'm hoping that brings it closer, because a lot of the issues, and we had a pastor on, Reverend Ackrey from Chicago, who was plastering the networks, particularly CNN, the day after the 7-year-old was shot in Chicago and killed. And, he talked about the issue of economic inequality, but economic needs to invest in the city of Chicago, particularly the west side where the church is and where the kid was killed. And that is exactly what Bernie Sanders said. And we talked about it on the air, and I said, look, you should have Bernie Sanders come to your show, come to your church. And he says, I'd love to do it. I'd love to get other churches to have him do it. And I'm hoping that Bernie Sanders does that. But I think, to me, if you put together a coalition, as Jesse did, and as big as Bernie Sanders is doing, you have yourself a very powerful campaign that I think that has a legitimate shot to be the Democratic nominee. Now, you have to put all those pieces together, but I think Bernie Sanders has the ability, and maybe this is the prompting of the whole thing. Your take on that from your perspective in the West Coast?
Well, it has long been a criticism that a lot of progressive political movements in this area have been dominated by white leadership. So that is not a new issue for our community. And I do have to point out, and I have been writing about this in my blog at Daily Kos and at the Capitol Hill Times, and also a new independent network called Democracy Watch News, that a lot of what Marissa Johnson was addressing was actually focused on the city of Seattle, not just on the Bernie Sanders campaign. In fact, she began her talk by mentioning the fact that the Seattle Police Department has a consent decree, with the Justice Department because of allegations of the use of excessive force and racial profiling by the Seattle Police Department. So also, our mayor, Ed Murray, had two main themes to his State of the City address earlier this year, which were economic and racial injustice in the city. So, as I've reported before, the Seattle Police Department has been reviewed by the Department of Justice, and that has been an ongoing controversy in the city of Seattle. There's been calls for a more effective civilian overview of the police department. And so I think, Marissa Johnson and her supporters took advantage of the opportunity to confront these issues directly, while there was a lot of media there. So that's another point that maybe hasn't been made clear, that it was not solely focused on Bernie Sanders. It was actually a criticism of Seattle and racial inequality in this city specifically. So that's another point that maybe was not clarified in the national media. But in terms of the Black Lives Matter campaign and the Bernie Sanders campaign, I really, just my editorial comment is I don't think that either one of these movements are going to be affected in terms of slowing down either one of these movements. I think both are national movements, and Bernie Sanders is speaking to tens of thousands of people all over the country. There were numerous memorials on August 8th for Michael Brown all over the country. And so, neither one of these movements is going to slow down. And in the world of journalism, we call these stories that have legs. They're not going to go away. So that's very clear. Yeah.
No doubt, Mark. And I think it's important. I mean, we've like yourself, have focused a lot on the issues of police reform. And what Black Lives Matter has been doing as a whole, I think, is very, very good. I mean, they challenged Secretary Clinton. I just thought that, in my view, trying to stop somebody from speaking on an issue that really has nothing to do with the 206 group or even anything to do with Bernie Sanders' campaign was a little over the top. But that being said, I think that it's really important that Bernie Sanders addresses these issues, and he has. And he, again, meeting Jesse Jackson yesterday and going to Charleston is a couple of examples. But I think that this is going to be an important time, and I advise those in Black Lives Matter to go after Donald Trump. I mean, if you look at this, I mean, you understand it because you and I share the independent media. I mean, Donald Trump goes to jury duty, and there's 15 cameras following him. I mean, that's a pot of gold if you're trying to protest somebody. I mean, he's around.
Yes, and there's another controversy surrounding Donald Trump, and that is that I was just reporting on this earlier this morning, is that the Shell Oil Drilling Corporation tweeted support for Donald Trump because of his support for their Arctic drilling programs, which is another major controversy in Seattle, where there have been mass protests and kayaktivists trying to block the Polar Pioneer oil rig.
We'll get right back with Mark Taylor-Canfield. It's the Jeff Santos Show. Back in a flash.
Connect on Facebook.
Jeff Santos Show.
Back on American... I don't know, America's Jeff Santos Show. I don't know why I said that. We're talking with Mark Taylor-Canfield here on the Jeff Santos Show. Your phone number to join us, 844-3-SANTOS, 844-372-6867. Mark, one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about, and it's an issue that is very much the case here in Boston, also just south of us in New York, and that's the issue of rent control. We obviously heard a few years back when as a candidate running for governor and I think mayor at the time too, and the rent is too damn high. Well, in all seriousness, it is, and even in places like Seattle. And interestingly enough, when Bernie Sanders, now of course a senator and candidate for president, was a mayor of Burlington, was out in Seattle talking about this issue. And, it is an issue that doesn't get a lot of play. Interestingly enough, the labor leader, Mr. Miliband, had that as a big part of his focus running in the UK. And but this is an issue that's causing a lot of problems, because Seattle was for a long time a relatively inexpensive place to live. That's changing, isn't it? Tell us more.
Yes, rent control, along with the Arctic oil drilling by Shell, because they were bringing their oil rigs, according to the Seattle City Council, illegally into Elliott Bay. But besides that issue, this issue of rent control has been the number one issue in our local city council elections. We have a new redistricting program that the voters voted on in Seattle, so we have a whole new set of candidates running for office, and Seattle is currently experiencing the fastest increasing rents in the country. With all the development with Amazon and Google, Expedia, and all these major corporations moving into Seattle and setting up their headquarters, the rents have skyrocketed. There's a lot of complaints about overdevelopment. And yes, it's been a huge issue. There have been protests. There was a major debate between anti-rent control lobbyists for the real estate industry and our local city council members, Nick Licata and Shama Sawant. And Shama Sawant, who actually is an independent socialist, she ran on the $15 an hour minimum wage campaign during her first election and was very successful in spreading that movement across the country. Well, her number one platform issue today is rent control. And unfortunately, Jeff, the city of Seattle cannot, on its own, institute rent control. It's been prohibited by the Washington State legislature. So any lobbying on this issue is going to happen at the state level. And what some of our city council members and our mayor is saying is that we need to be lobbying, the city officials need to be lobbying the state legislature on this issue. And then just a quick sidelight on that, which is a very important issue, and the Justice Department actually has a case in Boise about people being fined and arrested for sleeping outside. And by the way, the Justice Department is arguing that homelessness is not a crime, but in Seattle we have at least 10,000 people who are homeless, at least in Martin Luther King Jr. County, as of the last count in I believe it was February. So it's a huge issue in Seattle. The skyrocketing rents are displacing a very large portion of the population, including a lot of the black population in the central areas of the city. There is this experience we're having here with Black Flight, where a lot of traditionally African-American communities are being dispersed because folks just can't afford the rent. And, to quote the former mayoral candidate from New York City, yes, the rent is just too damn high in Seattle. In some cases, it's been tripled. In fact, there's a business up on Capitol Hill that's been here it's been in Seattle since 1912. It's been on Capitol Hill since 1980-something, so 35 years ago it was opened on 15th Avenue. Angel's Shoe Repair Store, and Ray Angel's rent was increased by 300% and was forced out of the building where he's been for the last 35 years. So that's been a big issue in Seattle. There hasn't been a lot of effective public policy on trying to alleviate the situation. And once again, it's one of those stories that we as journalists say, has legs. It's not going to go away. So it would be interesting to see how this affects the city council races, but it has been a major issue, and there have been housing activists, like the former head of the tenants union, John Grant, is running for city council on this whole issue. So big issue in Seattle. Yes, it's getting very expensive. People are saying, when you come to the city now, people are saying, hey, welcome to San Francisco or welcome to New York City. The only difference, Jeff, is that San Francisco and New York City actually have some forms of rent control. Seattle has none. So the tenants here are completely at the mercy of developers in terms of being evicted or having their rents raised by outrageous amounts. In fact, right now, micro units, 200 square feet, are going for $1,000 a month, and people seem to be very happy just to get those. So the most overdevelopment I've ever seen in any other city I've ever lived in. Just amazing. And obviously it's going to be a major issue, and that's not going to go away either. At least not until the real estate bubble bursts here, which is probably
let me ask you, Mark, how much of this is the economic inequality, the power of two major corporations, of course, Microsoft, Boeing? I mean, how much of this is a part of that there's the middle class jobs that were there in Seattle for a long time are gone, as they are in a lot of other places. And, so the only people that are able to afford these rents are people maybe who work on the higher echelon of major companies like that. And is that a part of this?
Well, it probably began, with a lot of these free trade agreements, so-called free trade agreements, which have,
right.
shipped a lot of the middle class, union jobs overseas. And yes, that has been a factor. If you're a professional in Seattle, you might be doing okay. If you're a software engineer, something like that, Amazon is probably the main focus of this issue right now, because they are renting so much space. They have opened so many buildings in Seattle that it's even hard to keep track of anymore. But there's been a huge influx of new employees into the city for Amazon, and there has been some criticism, and I hear it on the streets every day, that they are not addressing the way that their developments in the city have displaced a large part of the population. And
wow.
I think
of course,
a lot of
they're also willing to treat their employees, as the New York Times told us in the last 48 hours, too. Amazon.
Well, yes. And as far as Microsoft is concerned, they just announced they're going to lay off 6% of their entire workforce because of the whole Nokia debacle. So Microsoft is actually laying off employees, where Amazon is actually bringing thousands and thousands of new people into the city from communities that, in some cases from communities where it's not quite as progressive. So there's also been kind of a culture clash going on here, especially in areas like the gay Capitol Hill area. So, yeah, there's not only is an economic clash, there's sort of a culture clash going on here, but economic inequality and the displacement of entire populations is just happening on a daily basis. And I think it's so overwhelming, Jeff, that even our local city council doesn't really know how to deal with it. It's just overwhelming. It's happening so fast.
Mark Taylor-Canfield, we got a lot of questions for you. We're going to have to get you on sometime next week. Thank you, man. Great checking in with you, and all the best, and keep up the great work.
Yes, and, hello, everybody, on the Revolution Radio Network. Keep up the good work, Jeff. We're listening.
Thank you so much. Mark Taylor-Canfield, right here on the Jeff Santos Show. All the best, my friend. Right back with your calls after this timeout. Mark, you're first. I want to tell you that I think it is interesting at this time, and I thank one of our great emailers and listeners for sending me this, but the amount of money that Bernie Sanders is raising, small donor, that's the kind he has. Not a super PAC guy, not, having the Soroses or the Koch brothers, handing him a big check. But according to this website, 70% of the people who gave money to Obama in 2008, 70 are giving it to Bernie Sanders. A smaller amount to Hillary, even a smaller amount to Martin O'Malley. And this goes to where I think a lot of progressives have been, that they look at the 2008 campaign, the campaign of change. That was the word. Great, great word. That really snowballed and helped Obama become the nominee and then eventually the President of the United States. Now, of course, a lot of these online donations started with Howard Dean campaign. He ran into the quote-unquote establishment door, just as Bernie Sanders is, just as Barack Obama did. But at some point, you knock that door down. And that is why, if you are a Bernie Sanders fan, and we had an email yesterday from Stephen in the great Bay Area talking about the fact that, this idea that Bernie can't win, foolhardy, which is very much the case, Stephen. You're correct. The fact is this: Bernie can win, and he is doing everything in his power to make sure that he is the nominee. Yesterday, he was in Chicago. He met with Jesse Jackson. We've had Jesse Jackson on this show several times. try to get him on again, get a little bit of background and information on that meeting. I think that's a smart move. I believe that the more that you see Bernie Sanders and you hear about his issues and you hear that this is not a Johnny-come-lately, oh, I'm just here, I'm a one-hit wonder, I have no background whatsoever, I'm the latest incarnation of the New Bohemians. Remember that song, Walk on the Water, whatever I think it was, back in the early 90s? Later married Paul Simon. Some people say ruined his career. But Bernie Sanders has been at this as a mayor of Baltimore, as a mayor of Burlington, as a congressman from the great state of Vermont, and now as a senator from the great state of Vermont. Long history. So for people who are just finding out about Bernie Sanders, and today actually I've been wearing my Bernie Sanders T-shirt. Picked it up when he was in New Hampshire. And I got some thumbs up from people walking into the grocery stores in Cambridge today. Went to the dentist, got a thumbs up there. And took the tea and got a couple of people from Germany actually were very intrigued by Bernie Sanders on the subway into the studio. So you have to think about it. People have a chance to find out who Bernie Sanders is. And once they do, they should get hooked because there really is not anything like him out there in today's politics. Running for president. You can talk about Elizabeth Warren and Sherrod Brown, maybe a couple of members in the Progressive Caucus. But there's still, as much as I love Elizabeth Warren, as much as I love Sherrod Brown and several members of the Progressive Caucus, they are somewhat handcuffed because they are part of the Democratic Party. Some of them for a very long time. So it's very hard to talk freely as Bernie Sanders has. And my view is that is why Bernie Sanders is not only refreshing, but because of the fact that he was an independent. And I want to make this also very clear. This has been bugging me, on the vacation week and so forth. A lot of Democratic insiders are calling him a socialist. Oh, he's a socialist. Oh, he's a Democratic socialist. They don't even know the difference between a Democratic socialist and a socialist, first of all. And secondly, I love the idea of, if you want to call Western Europe, Sweden, Denmark, Germany, France, Italy, on and on. Finland. You want to call them socialist countries? Okay. I'll take that. And I'll look at their quality of life, how long they live, the vacation time they get, and I'll take that anytime, any day of the week. I'm not leaving the United States. I want the United States to be more like Europe, not less. See, the Republicans will never talk about this because it goes against everything that they're selling, whether it's Donald Trump or Jeb Bush or any other person with an R next to their names. They're selling more money for the defense contract. That's why we're going around the merry-go-round trying to bring ISIS. Oh, ISIS is coming. ISIS is going to get you. They're in your backyard. They're in your basement. They're coming for you. Or it's Iran. I pick up the New York Times. Big Front page ad going after Cory Booker. I should say center page of the Times. Full page ad. Very expensive in the New York Times. They are trying, on the Republican side, to run as they did in 2002 when they went after Senator, war hero, lost 3 limbs, Max Cleland, senator from Georgia, called him a traitor, a communist, a sympathizer, whatever. He defeated him. That is why when Democrats, and we heard already that Schumer's gone against the president, never been a big fan. There's been petitions out there, and I urge you to sign them to make sure that Schumer is not the next minority or majority leader of the Democratic Party. We can do better. A lot more senators out there that would be better than Chuck Schumer. Jeff Merkley, who challenged Harry Reid a couple of years ago, would be my choice. He wants 50+1 budget reconciliation all the time. We're back. It's the Jeff Santos Show. Thank you, Shane. Welcome back. It is the Jeff Santos Show. 23 minutes past the hour. We'll be talking to Mark Taylor-Canfield out of Seattle, Washington, in a couple of minutes. Let me just finish one more thought on the whole thing with Sanders. He will need people like Jeff Merkley, like Sherrod Brown, like Elizabeth Warren if he becomes president, because what you don't want to have is a progressive reformer with the old establishment. This is, of course, hurt Barack Obama, is that there were sort of a lot of the old guard, including Harry Reid, who wasn't that bad, but still stuck with this idea of making peace with Mitch McConnell, who, of course, gave Obama 1 week into his term the middle finger, saying my job is to make him a one-term president, not to be a senator from the great state of Kentucky, the Commonwealth of Kentucky, not to be a public servant, but to destroy the first African-American's presidency. And, of course, he did everything in his power to filibuster and stop everything, right? Okay. So you want somebody like a Merkley, like a Brown, and there are probably half a dozen other candidates there that you probably could work with. And that would be critical, particularly if he's in the majority, to make sure that you are having somebody have your back in the United States Senate. I mentioned the article yesterday that a lot of Democrats, sort of look the other way when they have a progressive like Bernie Sanders, even Elizabeth Warren, and even though she is a quote-unquote solid D, knows no I there, they wouldn't even give her a seat on the on the Finance Committee overseeing Wall Street. That's the power of the lobbying of K Street. So these are very, very important pieces. And, of course, the House has, again, 80 members in the Progressive Caucus. So you have a better chance there of the Speaker being progressive. And if you're going to win back the House, then I can tell you that it's going to be a wave election, and you're going to bring in a lot of people who were not engaged in politics until Bernie Sanders came along. And that is the only way to change the environment right now, because it's not going to be until 2022 that you can change the sort of gerrymandering that has gone on by the Republicans when they took power in 2010. So you got to get a lot of people, and a lot of white people, to vote for Bernie Sanders, a lot of African Americans, obviously, and Latinos to vote in the Senate. But in the House, a lot of these districts are lily white. Republicans design them that way. So Bernie Sanders has to get people, whether they're one-time Republicans or people who they didn't vote, for quote-unquote independence. And that is why there is this real understanding of how Bernie can get single-payer health care, 4 years of free university, breaking up the big banks. All these things are going to require congressional action. You just can't wave the magic wand, which is why I want to see, and we're going to try to get as many members of Congress on here and those who are in the Senate, if they're willing to come on. And I want to see them take up, if they don't endorse Bernie Sanders, take up the issue, single payer, breaking up the big banks, 4 years of free university, and so on and so forth. Those should be policies the Democrats are winning on. They're all popular. They're 60%, if not more. So be on the offense. Sick and tired of playing on defense. Not exciting. And doesn't excite the American voter. So think about a Democratic Party. Think about a DNC. Start playing this prevent defense. You know what the prevent defense does? It prevents you from winning. Believe me, as a lifelong Red Sox fan, I know about blowing it. Thank God 2004 came along. It's the Jeff Santos Show. Back in a flash.